Greetings, everybody. This is Hamid Khan with the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition, and welcome to our Tuesday evening webinar. This is our webinar part 35 since we started in third week of March, and it's been an awesome journey since then. I mean, it just who would have thought that we will not be meeting every Tuesday in Skid Row, but here we are, but trying to make the best of it. How do we continue to amp up? How do we continue to keep our conversations going? How do we continue to keep on building power? And really appreciate folks who've been joining us for the last almost 8 months or so. Tonight's webinar is our third Tuesday of the month, which is, so the first Tuesday is committed to how the police state intersects with gender and sexuality. The second Tuesday is committed to how it intersects with the war on youth. And the fourth Tuesday is committed to data-driven policing. And the third Tuesday is more about having a more general conversation, looking at the political landscape, looking at where the national security police state is. We have an awesome panel, but before I get to that, just a quick reminder that on logistics. So when everybody came into this call, you were muted, and the reason is that, you know, I hate doing this, but because of Zoom bombing and other stuff that has happened, we are trying to maintain the integrity of the space. So, but anytime people want to make a comment or question, either send me a message in chat, or Shakir Rahman, who's also helping, who's a co-host and the coordinating team member of the coalition, kind of watching the back as well as to any questions or anything, or just raise your hand. We will open it up for, you know, just a collective conversation amongst all of us as well. And secondly, if you want to message us through chat, the chat is available as well. So send us a message. And yeah, so today we wanted to talk about the state of the police state, as you know, to call it, for the lack of a different term, but that's the thing that defines us. That's where we are in the United States. And wanted to look at it as to where we are in this current moment. We talk about the police state, we talk about the national security police state, we talk about fascism, we talk about state violence. So just to kind of just build on that and do a little bit of a deeper dive, we have amazing comrades and friends and colleagues and supporters of the coalition as well, and partners. So we have Nana Gyamfi, who is an attorney and also the executive director of Black Alliance for Just Immigration. And I'll let Nana introduce themselves. And we also have Naomi Murakawa. Professor Murakawa is at Princeton and has done some amazing scholarship on the police state, on policing, on issues of reform and abolition as well. And they are an associate professor at the Department of African American Studies. Also, we are joined by David Chavez, a comrade and organizer who was with Critical Resistance, was also organizing with Youth Justice Coalition, and also kind of in that academic track as well, but bringing in a unique perspective from the street, on the street, from the hood, as to what does it mean to be there. So what we thought we'll do is to open it up and have our panelists take some time to share their views about the state of the police state, but also kind of just setting the tone, like, you know, just that in a sense, what I've been thinking about more or less is that we talk about the police state, but is this really a garrison state? And I know that there is, people think of it a little differently, but yet at the same time, you know, somebody having grown up in Pakistan, which was an ideal from a garrison state point of view, where the military rule. So how is it, like, you know, is an extension where we are so, in a sense, the notion of patriotism, the notion of nationalism, the notion of discipline, the notion of, you know, what is truly politically correct in this country, that you can't say a word against the military, that you can't say a word against a religion, you can't speak out against the police. So kind of that kind of level of political correctness that runs so deep in this society, where we have, you know, the history of black codes, where we have the history of sundown laws, which reminds me that the city of Glendale just most recently apologized for their sundown laws and decided to take them off their books. So in this very military style, and we talk about the militarization of police, but we don't get into that what are the mechanics of the militarization of the police, and what is it the police state, whether it's through the lens of global migration, or the day-to-day impact on our lives, or its funding. So we're going to ask our panelists to take about 15 minutes or so, or less if they want to. However, share their thoughts and what their thoughts are about this, and then we'll introduce themselves as they go, around, as what brings them in here, and their work. And we'll start with our comrade Nana Gyamfi. So Nana, take it from here.
Greetings, folks. How are you? I'm so pleased to be here. If my internet claims that it is fabulous, but it was sounding a little spotty when I heard other people speaking. So if it gets too spotty, you won't see my image here. I'll try to turn the video off so that sometimes that makes it roll a little bit better. But thank you so much, Hamid. You added some other stuff to the thinking, and I may have to get on those things on the other end. But I am Nana. I am a movement attorney for the past 26 years, an organizer for the past 30. I am now the ED of BAJI, the Black Alliance for Just Immigration. We are the largest Black-led immigrant rights and racial justice organization in the country, advocating, educating, and organizing on behalf of the roughly 100 million Black migrants, refugees, and our families in the United States. And as Black immigrants, we sort of have this ability to have this unique view into the police state, both as Black folks and at the intersection, right, with immigration and with the police state there. And so much of the work that we do with BAJI is looking at how the police state operates, both with respect to local, state, national police, but also looking at those who police be at the borders and beyond the borders, even into other countries, and the ways that the United States directs its police state into other countries, right? Most recently in the immigration world, reflected in these third-party state agreements that I'll mention briefly in my remarks, and having Mexico and the countries of the Northern Triangle also engaging their police state against particular Black and Indigenous people trying to make it to the United States. So standing at that intersection of racial justice and immigrant rights. Oh, sorry. I was like, what happened? I moved. Standing at that intersection of racial justice and and immigrant rights, there's a couple of things that come to mind that I wanted to make sure to highlight. One, which top of mind for us right now.
Nana, you're beginning to freeze a little bit. So, yeah. Just this last.
Am I? Can you still hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Fine. Yeah,
so looking at this, what happened over the summer, and then what's occurred with the Million MAGA March, right? And what we saw in terms of the police response there, we see this coalescence of local police, state police, and federal police against particular types of protest. We saw this before, most particularly, before this year with DAPL and what was happening on Indian lands or Native American lands with respect to oil pipelines, et cetera, where we saw local police working hand in hand with federal cops, and those federal cops leading in terms of charges. You see that happening again in the context of protests. And so you have, whether it's DC, Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, Atlanta, Minnesota, everywhere that you saw major protests in this country over the summer, you found ICE right there. You found Custom and Border Patrol right there. Not specifically for the purposes of grabbing up folks who they thought were migrants, but literally for the purposes of arresting protesters and pulling them into the federal criminal sanction system, so that you have, for example, two attorneys, young attorneys in New York who were part of the protests there after George Floyd's murder. They are alleged to have thrown a Molotov cocktail into an empty police car. They are looking at a minimal of 40 years in prison, okay, for an empty police car. You had ICE and CBP, Custom and Border Patrol, harassing and arresting people in DC wearing unmarked clothes, so you couldn't see their badges, you couldn't see their names, really operating as like a secret police. And for those of you who don't know, Customs and Border Patrol claim, dang near as policy, that they are not subject to the Fourth Amendment. So they claim they can search whatever they want, they can arrest whoever they want, and that they're not bound by those same the same laws, quote unquote, that state police and other police, national police or federal police are normally bound by. That's really important as we look at the rhetoric of the administration that's coming in. I'm not talking about the one that's leaving, allegedly, if there's not a coup d'etat, but the administration that's coming in that's talked about people not as protesters, but as rioters, not as engaging in freedom of speech, but as criminals, has made it very clear that there is this, Mohammed, as you were describing, this politically correct way to protest, and that anyone that doesn't do what they think is politically correct now is going to be subjected not just to state penal, penalties, but to federal penalties, whether they are citizens or of this country or not. And I think that's something people should certainly have on their radar, because the federal courts, they got mandatory sentencing. They have a totally different way of deciding what's serious or not serious. Something that's a misdemeanor in California will be an aggravated action in federal court. And you'll find, people will find themselves in a much more jeopardy to their liberty, as those Native people who were arrested during the DAPL protests can attest to, even for alleged crimes against property, but even more, people's lives. And so we find increasing situations in which ICE is accosting and in some cases murdering people when they're not even there for an ICE reason. And I think most recently of the story of a brother who fortunately was not murdered, but in Massachusetts, who was followed by ICE in a car as he was walking. And, they had no reason to stop him or to talk to him. That was almost a tragic, violent situation. And only by the grace of the ancestors did it not become one. But that's to let us know, again, the type of cooperation that's happening, that's always been happening, but is now happening up front. And whenever they take, they don't give away. So do not think that this new administration is suddenly going to act differently and say, why did we expect those powers expanded like that? Oh no, let's limit ourselves. That's not what's going to happen. Each administration builds upon and extends the terror of the prior administration. And so something for us to think about. Also looking at the way in which the government is using enforcement increasingly to turn administrative processes into opportunities for caging, and what that means for other administrative processes. So any of you who are migrants and have migrant family on this call will know that it used to be when you applied for a green card, the worst thing that could happen, or citizenship, is that they denied you. You went for your interview and they said no, right? Or they looked at your paperwork and they said no. Now you have people that are afraid to exercise their right to apply for benefits such as permanent residency or citizenship that they're entitled to, because that could be the last time you see your family. People are getting arrested right from and in those interviews that are supposed to be almost rote, and are being detained and deported from there. And again, I think about how many administrative processes there are, in particular, having to do with benefits, where people are going to offices that are federal offices, right? Or state offices associated with federal benefits. And how many, what is the shift that's going to be made into those non-immigration administrative processes where you could go to apply for WIC and end up being arrested and jailed, right? Thereby, and especially as more people need these benefits in light of COVID and the complete failure on the part of the government to provide the economic relief necessary. So that's one of the ways that they're going to prevent people from applying and from getting benefits, scare people, is to start to arrest people as part of that administrative process, as they're doing in the immigration world. Looking at biometrics and this increase in the types of things they want from you, right? In terms of your medical tests, your fingerprints, your blood type, your this, your that, all of these are going to become, this is part of the regular rote for immigrants. Immigrants have to engage. For example, if you have green cards, you have to reapply. You've got to give up all of this information again, all this biometric information. And so the federal government has become very good at collecting this information, at storing this information, at sharing this information, at getting this information from other places to compare. This data does not only include numbers, but it also includes people's personal effects, people's personal pieces of their, vestiges of their person, of their humanity. And I think it's important for us to think about that as we have this conversation. Also, the conversation about algorithms. We see how that has reared its ugly head in the context of, and the pushback against cash bail. We know that it will do the same with respect to detention and bond in that context of whether people can get out, but also coming into the formations of whether people have a credible fear of persecution when it comes to asylum. We are looking at the possibilities, and they look wide and very concerning in terms of where algorithms might be used, instead of really looking at people as human beings, knowing and understanding that those algorithms are rooted in white supremacy, classism, patriarchy, and other forms of oppression that will lead, of course, to unequal results. And then finally, looking at surveillance. The surveillance state is one that is, again, very well honed in the context of immigration, the ability to track people, whether it is the use of electronic monitoring, right? You have whole populations of Garifuna from Honduras that are in New York with electronic monitors on their ankles, right, and on their wrists. But it extends beyond that, right, to looking at people's cell phones, tracking people's information, looking at people's WhatsApp, because, immigrants, we love some WhatsApp. We have a WhatsApp group with 500 people on it, right? And all of those people are being monitored by the government, right? Looking at our Twitter accounts. When you think about places such as what you saw recently with Nigeria and SARS, where the government came in and decided to reduce social media, when you see the effort to try to get rid of TikTok, right? And people kind of chuckled about that. But again, often these are dipping the toes in the water, seeing how people respond, and then getting ready for a bigger response. And so we'll close by saying that the world of the police state and what the police state means now has really been exposed, in particular in this way that racial justice and immigrant rights have seemed to collide with one another by government action. And so while it is terrible in terms of the trauma and harm that it has caused, I think that it's an opportunity for us to have the kind of conversations we're having today so that we can have some cross-pollination of ideas and strategies of how we push back on what is really becoming a global police state with its headquarters in DC.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nana. As always, brilliantly shared and mapped out. So now we're going to ask Professor Naomi Murakawa to join us. And please, it's all yours. Shakir, if you can. Yes, there you go.
Yes. If it's okay, I think in a minute I'll screen share just to show some images. I'll start just by introducing myself. My name is Naomi Murakawa, and I'm an abolitionist. And to me, that means the criminal justice system cannot be reformed or changed by its own logic. What we are witnessing now is not a malfunctioning system. What we're witnessing is a system that is doing exactly what it was built to do, which is that it is absorbing and individualizing all of the structural violence that is necessarily a part of capitalism and racism and heteronormativity and gender normativity and national borders. And every attempt to reform or improve police and prisons secures the cornerstone of all of the unfreedoms of this current system. And that's what abolition means to me. And I'll go ahead and say, I came to this position very slowly, even though I've studied in the field for a while. When I first read Angela Davis's Are Prisons Obsolete? I understood it, but I didn't actually understand it in a way that I felt comfortable that I knew how to take it in and do the work. So I'll say this, I spent the better part of 10 years studying reforms that in my dumb little liberal heart, I thought might actually be a good idea, which means I looked in earnest at the consequences of Miranda rights, of hiring a more diverse police force, of de-escalation policies, of hate crime legislation, of everything that I thought in some way, come on, might be a little bit of a good idea. And that's how I got to abolition, is that I actually looked at everything that I thought might be a decent idea and came to the conclusion that this system cannot be reformed, that reforms make the system stronger, and any making of this system stronger enshrines us to the world of inequality that we're in now. And I open with that because I think that we are poised right now for a moment of expansion for the police state, with much of the expansion happening under the guise of reform. So the particular crisis that we have now is a set of overlapping crises, an economic crisis. We have a public health crisis in which surveillance is thought of as good medicine. And we have the massive, beautiful resurgence of Black Lives Matter protests that are popularizing demands to defund the police. And we are now at least a decade deep into popular critiques of mass incarceration, which means, and all of these forces together mean that we are poised for a project that is meant to recover the legitimacy of the carceral state. So I think we're going to witness growth through reform and efforts to recover the system and the legitimacy of this carceral state. So I just want to name 3 or 4 mechanisms that I see for the expansion of the police state. The first, I think we're about to see expansion to recover police legitimacy through more funding of community-oriented policing. So when Bill Clinton inaugurated the COPS Office for Community-Oriented Policing in 1994, He articulated community policing as a philosophy, not something that had any explicit directives. And then with that opening, the COPS office proceeded to give more than $9 billion over 6 years to local police departments to hire more officers and to institute so-called community policing. Studies just 6 years after that funding began asked police departments, what have you actually done with those community-oriented slots? And the answers came back. Most agencies were using those COP-funded officers for quality of life policing, also known as zero tolerance policing or broken windows policing. That is, they're making arrests for things like not being able to pay your subway fare or your bus fare, for public intoxication, for vandalism, for low-level possession, calling all of this community policing because the community wants it. So what we can expect from Biden-Harris is reinvestment in community-oriented policing. Biden has already promised an additional $300 million for community-oriented policing. His logic is that the reason it didn't work before is that it was underfunded. So we need to actually give more money to police officers now. He's including a new stipulation, which is that to receive this money, police departments will have to hire officers in racial demographics that match the demographics of the area being policed. And this is going to provide tremendous cover, especially at a time when you have mayors like Lori Lightfoot, who are opposing defund police by saying this is one of the only good jobs left for Black and brown people. So we have cities who are certainly going to seize that money, make their hires, and do it in the name of community fairness and racial justice. All of this neat packaging around community policing is going to be there side by side with everything that Nana just presented to us, which is it's community policing, but also we're going to talk about riot control and hardcore immigration control. We are going to continue the legacy of the enmeshment of federal, state, and local officers, all unified in a single force for maximum lockdown. So we're going to see all of that together. So that's the first form of expansion, an effort to recover the police. The second expansion we're going to see are through efforts to reduce mass incarceration. We are in a very strange moment where almost everyone opposes mass incarceration. You don't really get anyone, even like in the American Enterprise Institute, who defends mass incarceration. So you have Kim Kardashian, you have Van Jones and Newt Gingrich linking arms, crying together over the horrors of mass incarceration. Trump opposes mass incarceration. Biden apologized for and opposes mass incarceration. And here's where I want to look a little bit at what that means when they oppose mass incarceration. So I'm just going to ask, can you see this? Okay. So we're at a phase where we are going to see more and more references to probation, to new forms of supervision. They will be marketed as fair, kind, more efficient. And indeed, you should not believe the hype. So here's where I want to do a little bit of decoding. So the Biden-Harris plan, they call the Plan for Strengthening America's Commitment to Justice, has a couple blanks that I want to break down. So one phrase we're going to hear a lot is we need to encourage states to shift from incarceration to prevention. Sounds pretty good. And the federal government plans to offer $20 billion in competitive grants to encourage states to shift to incarceration from prevention. The other thing that there's also federal money for is efforts to expand effective alternatives to detention. And we're going to hear this a lot, and it's going to sound, I don't know, almost like something I might have said, like, yeah, we don't need more incarceration. We need more alternatives in care and prevention. Here's what they mean. When they say alternatives to prevention, they mean more probation and more drug testing. So that plan for 20 billion in competitive grants is referencing a Brennan Center proposal that was called the Reverse Mass Incarceration Act, put forward in 2015. The model programs that the Brennan Center puts forward as programs everyone should emulate. Illinois probation, Illinois specialized courts and intensive probation systems. The primary reason why they are pushing the Illinois version and another version called HOPE that comes out of Hawaii is that mass incarceration to this set of reformers quite literally means the number of people incarcerated in federal and state prisons. And that is one of the most expensive interventions for the criminal justice system. So when they're pushing for more probation and more drug testing, they are not pushing for less surveillance. They are not pushing for fewer people in the system. They certainly aren't pushing for prevention or something that is life enhancing. They are pushing for the model that saves money because through a system essentially of e-carceration, technological interventions, forcing people to pay for their own sets of self-monitoring geographic boundaries that are monitored through GIS, intensive drug testing, where people are also expected to pay for their drug testing. And also all of this is a model of what's thought of as the logic of swift and certain punishment. That is the technocratic version of good prevention means you tell people with certainty, if you mess up once, you get this exact sanction. And the sanction they're putting forward as a good idea is often short jail stays. And counties tend to pay for jail stays, not states, which means the funding structure for all of this is one of trying to save money by maximally monitoring people and always shifting the costs downward. So instead of the expensive cost of housing, of punishing someone and selling them in a state level facility, it's push everyone down to county level, push counties to pay, and ideally push the criminalized people themselves to pay for everything. That's the model. Also, they're pushing hard to expand something that's called alternatives to detention. I've looked at this, almost all of this is more so-called alternative courts. What I want to underline is what we're seeing here is more probation, more drug testing, more drug courts, more juvenile courts, more veterans courts, more specialized courts. And what does all of this do? It expands carceral capacity. It expands the scope of just processing more and more people through the system. I'm losing track of time, I'm sorry to say. How am I doing?
You're good. You've, let's see, you got another 5 minutes.
All right. I'll just say one word about drug courts, because I do think this is going to be coming up a lot. Empirical, so the evidence around this is quite, is mixed. Although in my opinion, it's all bad. By which I mean, even the studies that find something deemed successful, to me, are only stories of successful repression. So through drug courts, the model is you show up through court programs for long periods of time, usually taking a drug court sentence of surveillance that is much longer than anything that you would have gotten as a jail or prison sentence. You often pay for your treatment. You're required to go to treatment. The model of treatment tends to discourage methadone maintenance, which is one of the few things that we know works. We also see dynamics where cities expand drug courts, and we see a system increase in drug arrests because police and judges know that there's an expansion of carceral capacity, and that's not something they're going to leave behind. So the more we fund these additional arms of the carceral state, the more we're going to see expansion. And it'll all be called opposition to mass incarceration. And they sort of mean that. They mean it in the smallest, most technical sense, but they absolutely mean increase the repression of the prison industrial complex. right? So maybe reducing mass incarceration, but increase all of the repressive forces that we should not tolerate. The third mechanism, and this one's basic, but I have to say it, the third mechanism for massive expansion that I think we're going to see, expansion through the criminalization of poverty. This is the most basic function of the criminal justice system. They protect private property, they protect the wealthy, and they criminalize the poor. And when I say we're on the precipice of this, I know we're on the precipice because we are in a system of such structurally induced poverty in which no help is coming, and a bunch of people, possibly as high as 30 to 40 million, could be facing eviction at the time of a pandemic. When I say we are a country that criminalizes poverty, I am not saying poor people commit crimes. I am saying quite literally, it is a crime in this country to be unhoused. So I just want to show you, this is a very recent report that came out from the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, where they're looking at citations, that is infractions, non-traffic infractions, what it is police give tickets for. In 2019 alone, California gave out more than 250,000 non-traffic infraction citations. LA County gave out more than 40,000, and we're looking at the top 10 infractions here. I want to point out that almost all of these have something to do with being unhoused. Okay, so when you see refusal to take down a tent, shopping cart possession, camping on a beach, or camping in a park, that is a way of saying the police are giving you citations for being unhoused, right? I'll also say most cities at this point criminalize the act of sleeping in your car. If we actually have this wave of convictions, we are going to see more people sleeping in cars, which means the criminal state will be coming to them and giving them a citation that has a base fine, normally of at least $100. And then on top of that fine, fees for everything that the state piles onto. This is a citation for being poor in which the state is now trying to extract funds from you to fund the police department, and you can't even pay your rent. I know we are at a moment where it has taken so much activism and so much work to force a national conversation on police murdering people in public, right? And I know that that is obviously egregious and horrible and wrong. We have to get to the place where we can have a conversation about how brutally violent and unacceptable it is to give out citations in these and extract from the poor and people of color as a way to fund the system that is fundamentally created to keep them in their place, right? That is also a form of massive violence that we have to confront. So those are just three of the ways that I think we're poised for some expansion of the police state.
Thank you. Well, just saying it as it is. And that's exactly what we are looking for, because that's the reality, and that's how we see it. Because unless we know our fight, then what is our fight back? So that's exactly where. Well, I'm going to pass it on to David, who's been in the trenches, on the front lines, and just knowing the fight and fighting back. So David, take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Hamid, and thank you, Nana and Naomi, for setting up the conversation in the way that you did. That you both, articulated the different aspects of our current state of the police state, which is continuing to expand in multiple ways and sharpen its teeth, especially under really counting on the relaxation that's going to come under a Biden form of liberalism, that they're now more poised to sharpen those teeth of the police state and use them as they had done under the first Biden administration or his vice administration, right, from 2008 to 2016. So a couple of things I want to talk about, just some ruminations, like more generally, and also like let me introduce myself too. So my name is David Chavez, born and raised in Santana and also La Habra, California, out in Orange County. And I used to be an organizer with our volunteer member of the LA chapter of Critical Resistance from 2006 to about 2012. And also one of the founding folks of the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition through my work at the Youth Justice Coalition. And I'm currently a PhD candidate in history at the University of California, Riverside, where I do work on the history of youth policing in Los Angeles. So I'll talk about that in a second. And then lastly, like currently, I'm also a self-unemployed person because of COVID. I'm at home watching a 3-year-old and a 7-year-old while my partner works full-time. And because I was working as an adjunct or a part-time professor at Pasadena City College, and being on unemployment, I make more money than teaching. So, even with the cutbacks of the $600 that, some of us were able to get, and now like the $300 a week that we're getting to. So that's where I'm currently at, and I stay in the city of Pasadena, Northwest Pasadena, the historically redlined and over-policed, and just not over-policed, just policed community of Northwest Pasadena. One of the few places in LA County, besides the city of Monrovia, that actually allowed Black home ownership in the 1930s and 40s. So there is still like a legacy of this happening here. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Pasadena in a second too. So first, just some thoughts that I've been thinking about the police state. So yeah, the response to the mass protest, the Black Lives Matter movement, and the insurrections that happened throughout the country have, especially places like Minnesota, but throughout the country, and the sustained ones in like Portland and so forth, where people were demanding the abolition of law enforcement. People were demanding justice for those killed and murdered by the police. The state right now has figured out ways, like it always does, like it did in the 1960s for the civil rights movement and so forth, and the Black Power movement, of ways to try to absorb that type of anger and the direct democracy that was happening in the streets through the pernicious, violent forms of liberalism that this so-called republic and so-called United States has always organized around, right? The same form of liberalism that has that allowed for colonialism, settler colonialism, to happen under the forms of liberalism and all-out war on Native people, up until the official supposed end of hostilities in quotation marks, with the Wounded Knee massacre and the murdering of children and elders by the U.S. military. And the same form of liberalism that has many guests on this on the Stop LAPD Spying weekly talks or meetings have talked about, in terms of allowing Jim Crow segregation or apartheid and chattel slavery to continue, as well as this kind of like third piece of imperialism, and as Hamid said, the garrison state. And so I'm going to talk about that first, the garrison state, and where we're at with this. Right now, I think the U.S. military is very excited about Biden returning to the Oval Office in a new phase, because under liberal presidents, there is so-called liberalism, right? Liberalism in just general. They're really poised to expand the different programs that the first Biden administration had from 2008 again to 2016, in terms of the cooperation with local law enforcement, with the FBI and CIA working together and having multiple training programs, like in Central America, for example, and the massive amount of funds that have gone to Mexico, to Guatemala, to Honduras and El Salvador in particular, but also to the Dominican Republic too, of law enforcement being this other wing of the state, or of U.S. imperialism. So that's one thing, and the extension of and continuation of the role of the U.S. Command in Africa, or AFRICOM, continuing to expand its like form of violence, which, all of the debates and all of the pundits have had zero to say about, either Trump or Biden, kind of continuing this program of um, of imperialism in the continent of Africa. Uh, so, uh, so that's kind of first, like the Garrison State, and I can say, that living here in Pasadena, I'm actually in one of the vectors or intersections of the Garrison State. Here in Northwest Pasadena, where I'm only about 2 miles from Jet Propulsion Laboratories, as well as Caltech, both housed in Pasadena, or the Pasadena area, two of the research centers of U.S. imperialism, and through and not only and kind of connecting that to the kind of police fight, JPL and Caltech have been some of the most important technological centers, think tanks, and so forth, and also technological analysts for the police state, in particular for the Los Angeles Police Department. We owe JPL specifically for the creation of some of the earliest surveillance programs of the Los Angeles Police Department, starting in the 1960s, when they began to analyze, under Chief William Parker's police force, the communication and telecommunications of the LAPD, and began to build that underground bunker under Parker Center, some like 3 or 4 or 5 levels down under the ground, as this like command center for the police department. And they owe it to JPL to have designed and looked at the different ways in which the police state is working. And the same is true today, as the work of Stop LAPD Spying has demonstrated, through their research, and definitely through some of their allies and core members, of looking at the ways in which, for example, the research being done around algorithms, specifically coming out of UCLA, also one of the centers of U.S. imperialism, has been utilized as a liberal form of state violence. The ways in which the STEM area of academia, which has always lended its hand towards the military, it's where UCLA is also the founding of the internet, right? And going from DARPA as well, which was specifically used for military communication in the beginning, has now only continued to develop the ways in which the university, the local police department, and the military are all part of this garrison state, as we could call it. So I think that's kind of just like kind of the first rumination. And then the other kind of thought, or one of the other things I wanted to say, is the idea of surveillance as well. And only to add to the conversation that there's an interesting track to the new administration and who is going to be running technology, specifically under COVID. And now that we're all forced to utilize things like Zoom and other parts of technological tools to be able to communicate and do our organizing, or even do our teaching and so forth. It hasn't been lost on me, as someone who's a student at the University of California in Riverside, and it was just announced a few weeks ago that a new member of the board of directors of Zoom is Jana Napolitano, the former head of the UC system, who we fought as hard as possible, because she was also in charge of the Department of Homeland Security under, again, the Joe Biden administration, or the Obama Biden administration. And before that, she was the governor of Arizona, right? Something that myself and Hamid and many other folks on this call remember fighting as well, with Arizona being the testing ground for the attrition through enforcement ideology of the Department of Homeland Security that was led by Jana Napolitano. So you have all these different connections and synapses, or linkages that are happening right now with the police state. It's becoming much more integrated into our daily life, and putting more people towards vulnerability. The police state, I have kind of a different take on the recent election, local elections, excuse me, here in LA County, where things were, there were some successes, right? The ability for formerly incarcerated people, once they come out, to be able to vote while on parole. And this is personal to me. My brother is currently in Corcoran State Prison, and so seeing that as like a win, as well as the pushback of two other things like cash bail reform, or the kind of extension of algorithms within cash bail, and then the trying to stop the extension of felony charges. But at the same time, the massive loss to app workers, that I don't think we really are understanding what that really means for us in the garrison state and the police state, in the sense that now that app workers have become essential workers, and Uber and Lyft, as well as DoorDash and Postmates and all these folks, on the one hand, are one of the first places that folks coming home from incarceration actually are able to get jobs in, because they are always accepting work. So as well as those who are kind of are on the kind of outskirts of and pushed away to the margins of quote unquote civil society, so-called civil society, right? The folks are actually making it into these jobs, are now going to be subject to a new form of like technological serfdom, or like super exploitation. And to say that, the narrative of that, that some may take that we're actually winning right now, I think is a misnomer, because I feel like the connection that I'm seeing here with how the economy is actually going to absorb, as Dr. Murakama just talked about, absorb the end of quote unquote mass incarceration with massive surveillance and policing, is only going to push people more into these types of jobs, and only going to push people more into a type of precarity and abandonment that is going to lead to this kind of new setup that Dr. Murakama just said right now, of this massive ticketing and quality of life and poverty being criminalized even more to an extent than it already has. So I think we would be remiss, or we would be making a critical error to not link these two policies that happened here in the state of California, and specifically us for here in LA County. And that gets me to kind of the crystallization of where the police state is that the police state is all about reform. Now they're carrying the banner of reform, and nobody crystallizes that more than the new DA of LA County, right? Gascon, as well as the sheriff, Villanueva. These folks are not our friends at all. These folks are, the folks are as Malcolm X would say, right? The fox, right? They still have the same sharp teeth as the wolf, right? They're not the Joro Arpaio or the Jackie Lacey. At least that's how they say they're not. But they definitely are going to be one of the biggest issues for us, because the banner of reform has been wrapped around law enforcement at this moment of insurrection, this moment of massive questioning of the social order of 2.5 million people in cages, of nearly 7 or more million people under state supervision. And the response by the state has been trying to absorb all of that and really take over the banner of reform. And I think the key kind of critical word here is the misnomer of mass incarceration. That when it's positioned as that, when the state is positioned as, or the crisis that we're having here, the crisis of policing, of racial capitalism, of colonialism, that the never-ending colonialism we have here, by shaping it as mass incarceration, we lost a lot of ground, because it's a misnomer. It's actually a kind of unuseful term, really. And I'm taking this from Dylan Rodriguez, my mentor at UC Riverside, one of my mentors at UC Riverside. His kind of analysis, and he's been saying this for like the last probably 8 years or more, that when we say mass incarceration, we're completely missing the fact. Well, first, it's incorrect, because if it was truly mass incarceration, then the numbers would represent a non-racialized disproportionality of who's actually getting incarcerated. There's actually a decriminalization and race to innocence, as folks have said, of white crime, and we can see it just in this recent crisis, with the ways in which the Million MAGA March, the Million Fascist March, or whatever you want to call it, and the use of of white supremacist militias to actually gain legitimacy and to not and to be allowed to continue to function, while it should be really understood that the FBI already has infiltrated almost all of those organizations. It would be silly of us to think that they haven't. They have. They're just allowing them to continue to go because they can manage them. And so mass incarceration is not about locking everybody up. It's a racialized target form of what proto-genocide or genocide, however you want to put it, but it is a massive directed afterlife of the chattel slavery logic that this state is organized around, that racial capitalism is organized around. So so I think when we have that analysis, we look at someone like our new DA, an LAPD officer, a veteran of the LAPD for 20 or so more years, a former chief of police in San Francisco, or a DA, excuse me, in San Francisco, who didn't prosecute or prosecuted very little of anybody who'd been killed by the police, and who is now trying to frame himself as a champion, including in the ballot that I had when I turned in that said, reformer, social criminal justice reformer. Right now, I think we need to just drop that language because of the fight that we have to really take on to ourselves. Reform, criminal justice reform, is going to get us into a lot more hurt and is going to have us betray the kind of morals and ethics that we need to have in this moment. And the moment that we have right now is a moment of counterinsurgency to heightened levels that will only increase as the pandemic kind of rolls through, and as the retrenchment back into away from mass protest and mass insurgency into this idea of kind of back to normal of what? Back to normal of, proto-fascism, or, of US governmentality, whatever you want to call it. And we need to really drop that language, because if we don't, then we will not be prepared to fight what both Nana and Naomi have both talked about in terms of the new technologies that are being adopted right now. And more than that, we will be co-signing them. And there will be, because the funding is coming down the pipeline from every foundation and federal government, as Naomi just talked about, federal programs, they'll be more than happy to fund the community policing programs, and they might call it something else. They'll call it something else, but it will be to our detriment, and it will be to our betrayal of the ethics, the only moral kind of standing we should have right now, which is insurgency. When you're faced with counterinsurgency, you have to understand the political landscape, and we have to be insurgents in our thinking, insurgents in our organizing, in our analysis, and in our actions. And we can take, and again, this is not something new or novel that I'm saying. I'm really taking this again from Dylan Rodriguez's work and his kind of analysis too, of where we need to be is really be ungovernable as much as possible. And here's the case study that I would say, to me, tells me why we need to do this from my own personal experience here living in Northwest Pasadena. So George Floyd was murdered by the Minneapolis Police Department on May 25th by a group of Minneapolis police officers who called in response to somebody who was acting "quote unquote" erratic or so forth, and also for someone who used a fake $20 bill. Again, going back right to this idea of criminalizing poverty. So right away here, police chiefs all around the country, law enforcement began to do all these videos, all these things about, we condemn that action, we condemn that knee. It's really, they were more than happy to say that. They were willing to condemn that. And here in Pasadena, Chief Perez of the Pasadena Police Department came out with the video as well. Social media, they're very social media and savvy about this, and began to respond and say, we're going to ban "quote unquote" chokeholds, or he didn't say ban, he actually said to put a moratorium on chokeholds. So, we'll temporarily stop a maneuver of state violence that we know for the last 30 years has caused the deaths of hundreds of people. We'll temporarily put a moratorium on that. and we will, we're here with you, the community. They came and made speeches. There was a big march. We had the police chief and law enforcement support the Juneteenth event here, right? The event that's supposed to celebrate the ending of chattel slavery and the victory of those formerly enslaved who engaged in a massive general strike that ended and crippled the South. And finally, that message got to Texas to try to build something new, right? The Juneteenth celebrations to a celebration of liberation. They were all in support of that. And then on August 15th, just about four blocks from my house at La Pintoresca Park, 2 law enforcement officers pulled over a driver and a passenger in a car because of not having a front license plate. They did a U-turn. They did a quick U-turn, and within 2 minutes, Anthony McLean, a community member of Northwest Pasadena, a father, a grandson, a relative, and one of my neighbors was murdered by the Pasadena Police Department. And since that moment, it really showed me the limits of liberalism, but also the bankruptcy of liberalism, and of how it actually, when push comes to shove, the state is more than willing to enact what it has always been meant to do, which is to enact to have a monopoly on violence and to use that violence arbitrarily, or not arbitrarily, but targeted towards Black bodies, towards the poor, towards immigrant bodies, and towards those who they deem as radicals as well. So, and women and disabled people as well, gender nonconforming folks. The state has been, has all these technologies, and all the data is right there to show the disproportionality of the state. So, in response to that same evening, because this was done in the early afternoon around 4 or 5 p.m. when Anthony McLean was murdered, shot in the back while he was running away from law enforcement, and he was laid on the ground. They handcuffed him while he had a bullet wound in his back, and began to bleed out. And the community was literally sitting right there. Women, children, relatives of Anthony were right there in the park, and they began to form him. They began to push back and try to ask questions, try to see what was going on. And the response by the Pasadena Police Department was like the response that we've seen throughout this country. They called for backup. They began to try to just quote unquote, disperse the quote unquote unruly crowd. They began to pepper spray the crowd and also tase members of the crowd. And when one of the community members, Nafisa, a mother, tried to protect her son, who was with her at the park at the time, from the brutality of the Pasadena Police Department, she was also pepper sprayed. And then she now has a case against her. The city is actually trying to sue her alongside of 3 other community members, Trevon, Jaymon, and Reggie, family and relatives of and friends of Anthony McLean, for that evening for supposedly inciting a riot and engaging in violence against a police officer, assault against a police officer. But as the community members actually told me, and as the narrative from the street is that law enforcement that night began to engage in using flashbang grenades, pepper balls, to disperse the crowd that same evening that Anthony was murdered, as he laid out there on the street. The next day, community members were mourning at the park. They had gathered, and as the sun began to set on Sunday, August 16th, the Pasadena Police Department came back, but this time they came back with members of the Glendale Police Department, members of the Monrovia Police Department, and a couple of other jurisdictions in riot gear, and began to push the crowd out of mourners who were there in the park, and began to again disperse people using flashbang grenades, pepper balls, and other forms of weapons of against human life. And so that was the reaction by Pasadena and the narrative of Pasadena, right? I'd really, if people, especially if who are tuning in who are not from Southern California, Pasadena is this city of roses. There's the Rose Parade. There's all this, all this stuff where the city where Jackie Robinson is from. I actually live 1 block from the high school where he went to, and I teach at the school he actually went to at Pasadena City College, right? There's this narrative of around it. And the city quickly began to demonstrate that that the actual plan of Pasadena is and continues to be a violent form of policing towards the once segregated part of the community, the long-standing Black community of Northwest Pasadena, and most technically actually Black, Brown, and Japanese community where I stay, because just down the street there's also a taiko drumming center, historic taiko drumming center, because of redlining and the ways in which racialized housing happened. This was the only place that Black, Mexican, and Japanese communities could actually buy or even rent houses in the city during this period. So 2 days after that happens, after that second push out of the park, they release a video, no narrative, just a raw footage of their own officers tasing a community member and pepper spraying a community member as evidence of the unruly Black unrest and the racialization, demonization of Black protest, and as a way to set the tone for how they would see the reaction of the city officials and of the larger Pasadena community, as the Northwest as being, having this reputation of being a place where you don't go to. So that happened on that Tuesday. Through community protests, and definitely led by the Black Lives Matter Pasadena chapter, as well as other community members. There's just other community members, the NAACP chapter here, the members of Endelon. There's a different kind of community organizations, but also just generally the community at the park, the Northwest community, began to demand and do marches to try to get the footage of Anthony McLean's murder sent out, so the community could share to the world what they already knew, which Anthony was unarmed and he was murdered by the Pasadena police by being shot in the back. Friday of that week, 6 days after Anthony was killed by the Pasadena Police Department, a doctored video with a narrative was put out, and it's all still on the Pasadena Police Department's website. You can see this. It's obviously content warning because of the act of horrific anti-Black violence that it demonstrates. But they basically set up a curated documentary style, like 60 minutes status video, trying to demonstrate the inherent criminality of the Black body, as Stop LAPD Spying Coalition has talked about a lot, using the work of Simone Brown, right? The kind of historical use of that, and basically show this whole narrative that tried to position Anthony as inherently criminal, and also as the officers as inherently innocent. And we're more than happy to have the video come out doctored, where the officer who actually murdered Anthony, his camera magically cut out right when he discharged his weapon, and all of this nefariousness that cops be doing, which is lie, and more lies, right? That they're actually paid to do, that's how they're trained, right? So that happened, and since then, there has been local pushes by city officials and also by others, by community organizations, to try to get some accountability, trying to fire this officer, fire the police chief, setting up now a civilian oversight commission, which just as real quick, and I'll wrap up my points right now because I'm going on. I probably have, how much time do I have? Hamid, maybe?
If you can wrap it up, that'd be great.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. The civilian oversight model, which we should know has existed since the 1890s, since the first civilian oversight models in this country. So to say that it will have any type of outcome other than legitimize law enforcement as it's currently created is just ahistorical, right? And that's what's kind of being pushed right now in the city. That's what city officials are even debating. They can't even come up with a decision of whether or not to do that. So that's kind of slowly coming, but only because there has been grassroots pushes just to even try to get some sort of response. So I'll end here. And the case study that I shared of Pasadena is of the liberal, quote unquote, liberal city. We have a Democratic mayor, Democratic city officials. We have a supposed Democratic, we have a person of color police chief, and our second person of color police chief in the last 5 years. And so Pasadena, the actions that are happening in this small, kind of sleepy suburban city will only be mimicked and part of the mundane aspects of policing that we're living with today, and will only continue to expand.
Thank you. Thank you, David, and thank you so much for sharing that story and what happened in Pasadena as well. And we saw that unfold right in front of our eyes. So, so thank you, all three of you, for sharing this. I don't know if we can change the screen focus here to Shakir. Is there a way we can all be on the screen? Take the spotlight off or whatever that is.
It should be now, but did I?
No, it's not. So, because it just brought you, but as we work on that, changing it back to others. So just want to open it up if folks have any questions, any comments. So yeah, because this way I won't be able to see if somebody is trying to get in. So where is that icon?
I mean, I think you need to change your screen to the gallery view.
Oh, there you go. There you go. Great. Okay. Thank you, Shakir. So yeah, I mean, I think a lot of information, a lot of stuff was shared, and really want to thank all of you for laying out the groundwork. And I know that I mean, this is also a lot of it seems bleak as well, but is also that but it's also where we hold the power. So how does that power being built? And but in order for that power to be built, I think there's also a dire need for a lot of honesty, a lot of dire need for what sort of cultural narratives are we building as well. So so I'm going to open it up to see if folks have any questions or comments. But as folks think about it, please see if you can raise your hand or throw it in comment or the chat room for myself with your comment, and I can read it out. And if you want to ask a question or make a comment personally, we'll definitely unmute. But maybe I'll start off with just brief comments from the three of you. So Nana, you and I have talked about this whole notion of crimmigration and this whole idea within the immigrant rights movement that all of a sudden this language around crimmigration became big. But there's still, this seems to be this almost a failure of recognition that law enforcement and the police state, and let me just take a step back, and I get into trouble, and which I always do, for saying things, but I think there's this romanticization within the immigrant community as well, and that is rooted in anti-Blackness, that being undocumented is just a mode of adjustment of status. So it just like, okay, well, I'm not a criminal, that is, or whoever that is, so just adjust my status so I can be a part and parcel of the social fabric and economic fabric. But so it runs both sides, but also in conversations with the broader Black community as well, and organizers too, there is, I think still they're not just kind of getting this sense that the immigrant body also becomes a testing ground for a lot of national security style laws as well, which then play down on the street on a regular basis. So in a sense, what is the way that you've been bridging this thing, both as being in the front lines as a criminal defense attorney, but also an immigration organizer, and now leading the largest Black-led immigrant rights organization in the country. How do you sort of navigate that and respond to that?
Okay, I'm hoping that you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great, excellent, because I went to the phone to try to see if it would be a little bit better. You know what, it's very interesting being, as you said, generally a criminal defense attorney, and now being in this immigration world, seeing how much of what we see play out in the criminal sanction system with respect to cops in cages, how much of that is already happening. And sometimes it even goes from the immigration, detention, deportation system side, right? The immigration enforcement side into the criminal sanction side in a way that I think a lot of people don't see. And so firstly, to deal with the first issue you raised, which is this issue of being undocumented and this notion that somehow immigrants don't deserve to be caged because, quote unquote, they're not criminals, versus Black people who apparently deserve to be caged, immigrant or not, because Blackness itself is criminalized. And it's a narrative that BAJI and other Black-led immigrant rights organizations are constantly pushing back against. Even when you think about DACA, the whole notion of DACA is premised on this idea that these children are here by no fault of their own, which means that it's by fault of their parents. The parents are the criminals, right? And we see how that's playing out, you know, even at the southern border with Mexico, where you have people that are coming into the country trying to claim asylum or get some other form of relief, and they're being separated, the children from their parents, and their parents are being directed to criminal court, right? Their parents are not being directed to detention. The children are being held in cages, allegedly, it's for their own welfare and for their own benefit, because their parents are no longer able to care for them because they're in criminal sanctions court. And so this is why we talk about immigration as really a racial justice issue. There are 100,000 Irish undocumented people in this country. Every St. Patrick's Day, literally, Hamid, they could go to every pub and St. Patrick's Day parade and just collect up all of those people. And that's not what they do, right? They don't raid their events. They don't run through various types of industries in order to collect up all the Irish people that are there. But they do that to Black people. They do that to brown folks. And it's rooted in this notion that the United States is a white ethno state. And the way that the United States stays pretending that it's a white ethno state is in large part with its capacity to engage in enforcement, in violence that is militarized, as well as in caging and in booting people out. And so I think that, you know, we're trying hard. We have so many people in the immigrant rights world who are so abolish ICE, excuse me. But then when we say, okay, abolish it all, it's like, wait a minute, now you've gone too far. No, the police are okay. In fact, they're bragging and excited about the number of police that are in their family, right? They think the police are okay and not seeing that connection between the police and ICE. And we see this in the increasing numbers of immigrant-rooted people, right? Migrant-rooted people, meaning they're either foreign-born or they're children of people who are foreign-born, grandchildren of people who are foreign-born, who are police. And I'd venture to say, if you look at LA County, I know that at least up until 2 years ago, if you looked at who was most likely to be a cop, the law enforcement person that had killed someone, the person was not a white person. That was not the most likely person. It was a person of color, generally that had some kind of migrant roots, right? That has bought into this idea of policing as this noble profession, as they've bought into the idea of the military as this noble profession. And we have a lot of work to do in immigrant communities of color to make it clear that this is the same system of cops and cages, that when we talk about separation of families, that it can't be limited to an immigration conversation about detention and deportation or what's happening at the border, that it must include jails, that it must include prisons, that it must include mental institutions, right? That it must include all of these carceral spaces and institutions and means of enforcement that put people into those institutions.
Thank you. And we have a question in the chat. Shakir, do you want to go ahead and unmute and ask the question? I think it's for,
sure, yeah.
for Professor Murakawa.
Yeah, Professor Murakawa or anyone else wants answered. Wanted to ask, we've been talking about this history of criminal justice reform organizations and institutions, and just that kind of constant cycle of how they've served to expand and legitimize the system over time. I want to ask how you all feel or think about what we've been seeing in this year, in this moment of kind of insurrectionary abolition, insurgency, seeing a lot of those institutions, a lot of legal reform institutions, nonprofits, also taking up the banner of abolition. And so, you know, even Brennan Center and those orgs that you're talking about, starting to use that language, what that kind of represents in, you know, this history of constant reform. Now the brand of reform that that all these orgs are taking up, that there's, you know, that even Ford Foundation and all these, you know, foundations are promoting is abolition, and what that means for the trajectory of abolition and the history of all that.
So I'll say one positive thing, which is the fact that so many of these organizations are trying to co-opt the language is a sign that we are getting more play, more power, more prominence. And I like that, right? I do think it's I think the way you ask the question suggests that you already know the answer, which is this is part of the reformist trajectory in which all of the builders come in and put forward a mantle of whatever the reform keyword is of the day. Oh, we're going to have more accountability. We're going to promote community ownership, and even adopt the moniker of abolition. And it means that we're going to have to look very closely at what people are actually proposing. And I don't think looking closely is going to be that complicated in a sense. We're not going to have to get deep into the fine print of it. We could ask ourselves some basic questions. Are they contributing more money to any arm of the carceral state? Are they legitimating any arm of the carceral state? Are they creating something they claim is new without eliminating something, which is what most of the history of criminal justice carceral expansion is. It's like, we're going to create this new thing. We'll call it probation. It'll be such a good alternative to prison. We'll create prisons. It'll be such a good alternative to the death penalty. We'll give cops tasers. They need non-lethal weapons, as if they'll use their guns any less because they have this additional technology. Right? It's just going to require us to look at what's actually being proposed. And if it's more money, more tools, I think we should always turn away from it. And I'll say some of those, I mean, you just look, it's laughable what people are calling abolition. It is truly a joke. I mean, it's like, I don't know what they think they're referencing. Nothing I've ever heard of. But I've heard we're going to abolish policing as we know it by making police more fair and representative of the community. Excuse you, no one said we want nicer cops who are friendly and polite. That's not what the call for abolition is, right? And so it's going to require, as always, vigilance, clarity of vision, and a lot of work.
Hey, don't even get us all started now. There's a question here about and I think David, if you don't mind, I'll toss it to you. There's a lot of youth out, during the insurrection, and pretty much youth basically leading. A lot of the marches and all of that. And I know you've been a youth organizer. You were on the front lines around YJC. How do you see this moment, and how do you see the police state sort of reconfiguring itself on this generational sort of level?
Yeah. First, apologies for, I noticed the chat right now too. I talked way too long. So sorry.
No worries. It's all good. It was all great conversation.
No, I was getting, yeah. So, but yeah, I think historically young people have had the imagination to not deal with the crap of us as like adults putting this type of ideology of the supposed hopes of the American dream, or the supposed hopes of liberalism, as I kind of talked about before. And when we look at some of the organizations that started with some of the biggest insurrections, or during this time of the 1960s, we often go back to that, and we don't talk about the age of, for here in Los Angeles, like the age of Bunchy Carter, the age of the Black Panther Party members were like late teens, early 20s, some as young as like 14. starting these organizations and having a better analysis than the 40-year-old professor, or whatever, so having these imaginations. And here locally and globally, we see young people at the front lines. And I think young people, because I think they haven't, I think they also have the most experience to a carceral place, which is the school, which I think puts them in a lot stronger position to have an analysis as well, to fight this system and think of something different. I obviously think social media has allowed a lot of conversations for people to have, and videos, which in one sense maybe motivates people to get into the streets, but could also be a detriment too, where social media, we kind of assume the that's what revolution, or that's what insurrection kind of looks like. But yeah, I think young people have the most at stake. I think also the historical, the ways in which the police state targets young people, in general, right? The crimes, of the quote unquote crimes, or just the policing of truancy, of staying past 10 p.m. if you're a young person, of being, my experiences of going to the, as I mentioned earlier, the Pintoresca Park, and seeing the targeting of young people for shooting dice by law enforcement, and running up on cops running up on children and doing field IDs to 10 and 11-year-olds is normal policing. And I think young people have this physiological understanding of that, those who have been on the front lines. And that insurrection is definitely going to have young people leading it, and also to have this, like, I'm excited for, like, the multi-generational push, and I think, historically, if we look at, the civil rights movement, where we analyze the civil rights movement and the role that SNCC played, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, of actually, like, breaking apart from the NAACP, or like SCLC. It shows us the historical, the ways in which that is actually a way to move movement forward, as young people on the front lines.
Mhm. Thank you. So we have, I promised these folks about no more than 90 minutes. So if you guys can stay another maybe 5, because we do have another piece on the agenda as well, but really appreciate it. Jamie was on stack next. Jamie, go ahead and unmute yourself, and let's keep it brief. So for all of us, please. Not you, Jamie. No, you're just asking questions.
Oh, okay. I was like, so I have a question for all three, if that's okay. So I help to facilitate programming around data-informed community-focused policing, which is the local new iteration of predictive policing in Los Angeles. And just, I want to say that this kind of in-depth analysis makes me really, like, kind of encouraged that that's the kind of study that's going on in this group, without, like, kind of a campaign running. So it's, it's kind of hard, like, because you want to be in constant campaign mode, that you feel like you're lacking when you're doing all this study. So my first question is for Nana. I'm curious around, when we speak, I guess I'll just put it this way. We were doing a teach-in for a group that was doing, trying to remove police from Metro. And one of the biggest pushbacks, or some of the pushbacks that we got, was from folks that were undocumented or newly received citizenship. And that what you spoke about was, the affiliation or the appreciation for police. So I'm just wondering, in your context, like, how do we kind of talk about surveillance, and what is your advice when we're kind of in these spaces where people are like, yes, we want surveillance, we don't want police, but we want surveillance. And then with Naomi, I wanted to see if you could speak a little bit to what the iteration is of what you're kind of talking about with parole, probation, community supervision, which is now kind of being spoken about, offender-based policing, where we see the integration of community services, but saying the tactic of monitoring and tracking and tracing and deterrence methods being necessary, even though the BJA, the Bureau of Justice Assistance, the National Institute of Justice is saying these aren't even effective, but we're going to put money into it, and we're going to throw out some community, services, even though, and on top of them saying that none of these interventions of giving community services has stopped recidivism. So they have their own studies saying, even if you throw that at people, people are going to go back to jail, because we have these studies of, 3 years, 9 years, people going back to jail, even if they have that. And then David, I wanted to see if you could speak to this issue of Gascon and how we have these conversations in LA. Because I, was kind of on end of having a discussion with, with folks, organizers around that. And my quick, response to that was like, let's not praise this guy. But at the same time, there was immense amount of power that was built. And then how do we take that power that was built and have these very tough conversations without, families who were on the front lines of protesting, of being in front of the Hall of Injustice, putting themselves on the line, really calling for this, reciprocity, because lives were lost, sons were lost, siblings, were lost. And how do we have these conversations? Because this is real, real feelings, real lives. And how do we take that power and have this conversation without diminishing, that was built. So I'll stop there, but those are my 3 questions. And so maybe if we can start with Nana, just,
Thank you.
All right, I want to make sure you can hear me. So I'll do so quickly because I have to go in a little bit, but let me say this. One of the things that we strive to do as BAJI is to reorient our folks outside of the context of American exceptionalism. The United States has a hell of a PR game. And the police and surveillance in the form of technology is presented to folks living outside of the US, as well as folks living inside of the US, as something fantastic and wonderful. CSI, people dig it. In fact, as a criminal defense attorney, if you're doing a case and you can't pull out a bunch of people, forensic scientists that are going to come in with this and that, and prosecutors have the same issue, people are confused because they think that's what's supposed to happen. They like that. They think all of that is fabulous, right? And so what we do is to point out, first of all, to root people back in their home countries. Because for most of us in our home country, especially when you talk about the migrants of color, the idea of our home government surveilling us, we don't like that idea. That we see as a problem, right? So there's some kind of notion that the US, when it does it, is somehow better, just like they think the police are somehow better. They don't associate them with the way that they are. When I talk to people from Bahia, Brazil, about how in the United States they kill at least 1 Black person per day, the police, they're like, in Salvador, they kill 6. You know what I'm saying? And so they feel like this is a grand improvement. They're unconcerned, But rooting people in understanding that this country alleges this in terms of what it does, and it's an exceptional way of handling everything. And this is really what's happening. And, and being prepared for people and sort of supporting people as they feel that crash, because people don't want to hear that they ran from the fire into the frying pan into the fire, right? And so we've got to be prepared to catch people in the crash and to give people the answer, and the answer is organizing. The answer is study. The answer, right, is connecting up with one another and pushing back. But that's the hardest part. People intuitively are looking around. They see what the police do. They're seeing the headlines. They see the protests. It's not like they're totally lost, right? And even in the way of surveillance, they can look up and see that there's cameras everywhere. I know plenty of folks that are covering their camera on their computers, et cetera, from migrant communities that are concerned. They're noticing that when they say, I need a coat, they look and Facebook is giving them 25 ads for coats. They see that, right? And they understand that. They know intuitively that it's problematic. But because they don't see too many people complaining about it, and it's presented as the positive side of technology, they don't really see the danger. They would see the danger clearly if they thought it was the El Salvadorian government or the Nigerian government or Ghanaian government or whoever, right? It would be much clearer to them. And so that's part of what we do, is really breaking down that exceptionalism behind technology, that this is not just a sign of a quote unquote first world country, that this is a sign of repression, and that these are repressive tools, and then pointing out the ways in which they have been repressive, right? In ways that our folks can connect with, because many of us, unfortunately, have governments that at some point in our lifetime have been repressive and have used various surveillance technologies for that. And so that's one technique and way that we push back. This is not, I mean, for my grandmother's funeral, they had a police band. Everyone knew everybody, and everybody, you know, was cool. This is not what we have in the United States. It's not the same type of relationship. And even in Ghana, it's not that cool. You know what I mean? And so getting people to be clearer on those things is how we move.
Thank you. Naomi?
So if the question is about sort of tracking and tapping into the expansion of parole and probation and the tracking of social services with various measures of recidivism, I think I want to give a sort of zoomed out answer that I think there are many ways that the carceral state reinforces its own hegemony and forces us into its logic. And a couple of those ways are by telling us that certain metrics matter, and these are the metrics we should all look to. The metrics of the crime rate and recidivism. Part of the way we need to seize what's happening is to actually just dismiss those as the metrics. I understand they are measures of something, but we are about to witness the resurgence of all those claims of evidence-based policing, evidence-based recidivism. And it's going to be even more potent now because the elites are linking that kind of evidence to claims like, what, you don't believe in climate change? We have to believe science. You don't believe you should wear your mask? We have to believe science. Like, okay, fine, calm down. We can go with that because that has something to do with people's well-being, and I'm going to go with it. In this terrain, I am not at all convinced that the measures of well-being that we should go to have anything to do with recidivism or the crime rate. So part of the work that we're going to have to do is the work that Stop LAPD Spying is doing and already has done, which is do the organizing work that shows people and persuades people that their evidence matters, that they can write these policy reports this better than the Brennan Center. As David says, young people doing the organizing come up with better analysis more quickly than people in their 40s who've been studying this for years, right? It's the moment to seize the metrics that we want, to insist on no single metric, to move away from the NGO nonprofit model that is always saying, show us the observable outcome by these 1 or 2 metrics within 3 years. It's completely a way of making sure we stay in the smallest realm possible of fixes to the system that is. And it's time to just push away from all of those measures and actually enunciate our own vision of the good.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. David?
Okay, quickly, I'm going to first put that in the chat. Ask about the police review board articles, and I'm going to put on my timer because I've been talking too much. So really quickly, the question for Gascon, I think it's and thank you for bringing that up, because my response to Gascon is actually really informed by the families who are celebrating a moment of respite, right, at the moment of knowing that they kicked out somebody who had dehumanized them to the nth degree under Jackie Lacey here in the county. So the question of what do we do with that power, I think it's I think the question is what is kind of changing that analysis to what is power, to rather than seeing it as the electoral process, it is the actual networks, language, discourse, massive amount of consistent organizing that is the power. Getting people in LA County to come out, and in the city of LA to come out and support people who have been, the families of those who've been killed by police is the power. So I think it's really extending that and coming up with radical ideas of like how we're going to meet his limited promises, but then also even think about um, a type of reparation that goes beyond, and this is really for the families to lead and have those discussions, is what's the reparation going to look like beyond kind of the state, and taking the organizing adage of Ella Baker, right? That we need to be organizing, like having these conversations, and I need to be having these conversations with my neighbors to tell them to get involved, to build that power, block by block, to support the families of those who've been murdered by the police. So yeah, that's what I'll say.
So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all three. And this was as well, I don't know what else to say, but this was awesome. And thank you for a lot of that knowledge sharing and helping build this collective knowledge and collective power. We're hoping you can stay another 15 minutes to just hear about our next campaign. We'll keep folks for another, but Nana, if you want to, or folks, any of the three panelists, if you have to leave, absolutely feel free. But I want to invite our partner, Alexis Takahashi from Free Radicals, Free Rads, and the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition have been working together for quite a bit, and we just launched a campaign around starving the beast, basically, about defund surveillance. So I'm going to pass it on to Alexis. Alexis, let me just pass on the screen share to you, and it's all yours. Give me 1 second, and okay, take it away.
All right, thanks so much, Hamid. Also, thanks so much to the panelists. I listened into the last half, and yeah, just thanks for sharing your experiences and continuing to push us forward in this conversation. So like Hamid said, we just launched our defund surveillance campaign, and I'm going to share a little bit of our Instagram story that we just posted to kind of follow along. But we've been having these conversations in this space for a few months now. And I think for folks who, are new to this campaign, because of all of the energy that was generated last year around the people's budget, there was kind of like a call to stop LAPD spying, to kind of do what they do best, which is go really deep on the details and see what's really going on in the budget. And so we've been spending basically since August, kind of trying to do that deep dive. And so we have learned a lot. We've also unearthed many more questions, but we've kind of landed on this theme of defund surveillance, right? Because as we have these conversations about defunding the police, oftentimes the police say, well, if we're going to take more cops off the street, let's replace that with technology, right? So this even happened in LA City Council during this last kind of quote unquote defund that happened in the summer, where they were going to cut the records management system as part of the initial amendment to cut the LAPD's budget. But during the council conversation, basically this argument was made that, if we're going to be taking these cops off the street, then we need this technology to make our patrolling more efficient, to be more effective, right? So there's this idea that these surveillance tools, are basically going to replace police officers. And we know that that's really problematic, because the more that we have these surveillance technologies, the more embedded policing becomes into our everyday lives. Because now, instead of just like a police officer on the corner, right? Every time you pass a CCTV camera, automatic license plate reader, Stingray, right? All of those are interactions with the police, whether you are aware of them or not. So we know that both this technology we need to dismantle and abolish, and we need to defund the surveillance tech. And we also know that even before all this technology happened, like cops are also surveillance, right? So, when the way that they are watching us all the time, recording us, taking notes on us, right? Like they have always been part of the surveillance. So really trying to make sure that when we're talking about defund, it's really about an avenue to abolishing the police, right? We're not going to be co-opted by Garcetti saying like, oh yeah, like let's change the role of the police in society. we're trying to basically go into the budget to expose the police for how they're using our money to cause us harm. And so some of the things that we have been focusing on, we filed a few PRAs back a few months ago. You know, the LAPD's budget is about over $3 billion, which is a lot for us to kind of get our heads around, right? Most of that is towards their, you know, salaries of their humongous police force. But what we kind of focused in on was this technology support section, right? And we can see from the budget that this is an area that they have been rapidly investing in. So even just in the last few years, you know, they already are spending like $64 million, which is more than the budgets of other city departments just on the technology. So even if you combine the Department of Cultural Affairs, Economic Workforce Development, Disability to combine, way less than what they just spend on the technology. But of course, right, we're talking about this whole, you know, apparatus that they have is all part of surveillance, which is $3.1 billion. So right now, you know, we are talking about this budget that makes up over 50% of the city's discretionary spending. And that kind of reflects what the city has decided are the priorities of the city, right? And that means that what we are investing in year after year, more and more money every single time, is racist violence, protecting capital, digital redlining, mass incarceration, and racial profiling. So even while so many of our communities, especially during this time of, you know, economic and civil unrest, right, instead of being able to, for us to be able to take care of ourselves and to be able to just survive, the police are getting more and more money to you know, commit harm to especially our Black and brown brothers and siblings. So even just in the last 10 years, there's been a 57% increase, and there's a budget crisis right now, but LAPD has been labeled as like essential workers that are kind of like exempt from these budget cuts. But if you really think about the size of the increase that's happened, it's about the same amount that the city needs, right? So they keep making this argument that they are essential to our safety and well-being, which is something that we kind of at its core have to be able to kind of dismantle. Also, at the same time, this whole narrative of defund that has been kind of going around the country as this major success story, and that Garcetti has been, you know, lauded for, didn't really happen the way that they say that it did. So, you know, if you look at the city's legally adopted budget, it is not $150 million less than what they said. And in addition, if you go back to those city council amendments that I mentioned earlier, it did not go to the reinvestment in communities of color. It just meant to cover other budget shortfalls. So, you know, it's kind of, it was shocking for us to discover these things because we're like, we're just learning about this. And so we really need to like remake that media narrative and kind of go after these people who kind of are claiming credit for something that didn't happen, and really hold our elected officials' feet to the fire. So, you know, we're trying to, as Hamid said, starve the beast. So, you know, I think one really important strategy the coalition has used over the last, you know, decade has been going after different surveillance programs. So Free Radicals, which I'm, you know, a part of, we were able to dismantle PredPol this past spring. But one thing that we noticed is that, you know, they'll always continue to evolve, right? So if we dismantle PredPol, now they have data-informed, community-focused policing. So we're trying to think of a defund strategy as a way to kind of holistically be able to go after their resources and actually make it materially harder for them to control us. So as Hamid said, we're starving the beast of the resources it needs as a way to kind of limit their power. So this budget process takes a really long time, and it's starting basically probably next week. So one of the challenges of the People's Budget campaign last time is that it came, you know, into the mainstream kind of really late in the game. So it was really kind of May, June when, you know, these conversations were kind of getting into people's heads, and that by that time the budget's almost basically done. They're just kind of trying to trim the edges and finalize it. but we're trying to really get ahead of the game. And so we know that probably November 24th, they're going to announce their new proposed budget. And so also just to give some background on the budget process, basically, they take whatever budget they had last time. So this time it's like 1.8 billion for, this is their direct spending. And then they just say like, all right, well, we are kind of automatically going to get the 1.8 billion, right? So we're just going to propose another few hundred million that we want on top of that. So that's how this kind of keeps snowballing bigger and bigger, because no one ever challenges that kind of core amount of money that they keep piling onto. So they will already be announcing their new funding that they want. And so what we're trying to do is two things. One, we have filed all these PRAs to kind of get to know like what's in that 1.8 billion. If you really want to know, you'd have to like go to the beginning of the history of the LAPD budget and like kind of do the math every year. So we've asked the LAPD, the LA Police Commission, the Controller's Office, and the CAO's office for an itemized budget for this kind of like core base budget of 1.8 billion. And no one will give it to us. So they say, you know, LAPD says the controller should have it. The controller says LAPD should have it. So it's still a completely kind of mystery, black hole basically of money that they're getting every year, kind of without anyone going under the hood and looking at what's really there. So I think one, you know, we want to say there's no new spending until we can really find out what they're spending their money on, because it's kind of ridiculous that this huge sum of taxpayer money is like totally unaccounted for, and not even the controller and the CAO's office, who are kind of liable to know how the city's spending their money, aren't able to produce those documents. And two, we want to, you know, basically continue to push for defund and make sure that not only do they have no new spending, that we kind of get control of the narrative early and make sure that we get some meaningful cuts this time. So that's a summary. I don't know, Hamid, if you have anything to add to that.
No, I think that was very well done, Alexis. And I think I just want to also echo that, you know, when we're asking about where's the money, it's not for transparency. That's not the goal here, because they just, it's inherently, you know, I mean, they transparently kill, they transparently conspire, they transparently lie, they transparently put their knee on for 8.5 minutes. So transparency is already there. Exactly what Naomi was saying, that look, this is because it works. We want to use this as a political moment, as an organizing moment, that how do we disrupt? How do we build that power? How do we just like, you know, just get back to the basics as well, about exposing the in a sense, the organized corruption, which is a reality, and everything else. So it's at least trying to get a handle on things early on, before it goes on. So please, the call really is for folks to join us and be on alert, because they may be showing up with a draft on the 24th. We're also going after the other city officials as well, like the controller's office and other. So this is an opportunity to, again, you know, go after the whole, almost like the whole damn system is guilty as hell kind of thing. But how do we put a face to that? And what does it even mean to demystify and in that? So yeah, so please keep an eye on that. And I'm just going to last couple of minutes. If folks have, anybody has any comment or question for Alexis on the budget piece? Alexis, you did such a brilliant job that everybody's pretty clear to that. So that's awesome. Maybe a couple of announcements. Shakir, did you want to make an announcement? You're muted.
Oh, yeah. Can people see the screen, the flyer for this? So this, just wanted to share about this event that one of the Stop LAPD Spying coordinating team members, Chella, is hosting for the Trans Day of Remembrance or Trans Day of Vengeance on Friday near Echo Park at 7 p.m. Just, yeah, there's the flyer. Please come through.
Awesome. And my apologies, because I know that I just saw a message in there. Oh, that Carla Rodriguez had a question, but my apologies, Carla, that if you can, because it's 8 o'clock and we are wrapping it up. So my bad that I didn't get a chance to see your comment in the chat box. Shakir, do you mind bringing the screen down? So just like, yeah. unless if it's a quick comment that you want to make, because I can just unmute you as well if you would like. So yeah, Carla, there you are. Go ahead. Do you have a quick question?
Yeah, just you know, Alexis mentioned it, the surveillance, being the police for defunding surveillance. I think with the expansions of the metro, especially, here where I'm from Azusa. So the metro was like a really big thing, which is cool. Yeah, like it serves purpose. It takes us places. But I think also there's more surveillance in public transportation with the whole, if you see something, say something. There's not exactly how you would guidelines as to what it is exactly that you're seeing, what it is that you're supposed to be reporting, and who you're supposed to be reporting it to. And then also too, just because I know that David had mentioned it with the whole truancy, when we're talking about like the police and criminalizing, I see it a lot, and especially in, these cities and these communities that are lower income, that are more people of color. It's the police presence in schools. I know in my high school, not only did we have 4 campus safety, we also had 2 police officers. And Azusa High School is not a giant school. It doesn't require that much attention to safety. I think they focused more on who these troubled kids are than the academics in itself. And also, like, how do you, when having these conversations, how do you bring that up to, like, I would say the school board, like, hey, we don't actually need this many police officers, this many campus safety in school. I don't know. I talked to a lot of students when I was in high school. I graduated in 2017. I did a lot of community service with the school. So it was having these conversations, especially with the parents through their program called Café Azteca, that, they expressed their concerns that, instead of them feeling safer, they worried about their children, especially because the high school has a big ELD program, and it's most of these students are undocumented, and so it just it made them worry more than it made them feel safe. So how do we get that point across to, say, the school district or like the school board?
Mm-hmm. So Carla, and again, thank you so much. But I just typed in the coalition's email address. We have a whole fight, which is called the War on Youth, organizing against the war on youth. So if you want to send us an email, we will connect you with the folks who are directly dealing with how the youth are being criminalized and being targeted, particularly with these various programs. And also, of course, there's other groups like Students Deserve, and Youth Justice Coalition is another organization that's doing some really awesome work around these things. So happy to follow up at a later time. So yeah, definitely. But thank you so much for your comments, and thank you so much for raising these issues. Very, very critical. And we don't want them to get lost in translation. So please, would love to hear from you and send us an email. Okay. Thank you. Well, folks, so that basically brings us to the end. And thank you. I just want to thank again very much Professor Naomi Murakawa and David Chavez and Nana Gyamfi. I mean, just awesome for you all to stay. And I know that Naomi's calling in from back east. So thank you again for hanging in there. And so we'll look forward to folks next Tuesday. That's our data-driven policing meeting, which is going to be another phenomenal meeting. So be safe, be happy, and have a good night. Thank you. Bye-bye.